that this was the task they were trying to achieve, they would both write in a different way, because the goal has changed. The goal is not, I'm going to explain some really hard, complicated science to you to show how smart I am. The goal is, I want you to understand a concept, a new thing that we've discovered, which is interesting for many reasons. And to do that, I'm going to give you a little set of interconnected ideas. So what's missing from the text is these ghosts. They occur all over the place. They occur in every scientific paper. They occur in every type. And for me, this was, I knew this intuitively very early on when I started to write about science. Because one of the first stories I wrote, and I made a little drawing on the board at the back. It's in orange, so it's not very good. But it had to do with the hypothesis of lipid rafts. We had a scientist who believed that proteins were assembled within complexes of proteins that needed to function together on the surface of the cell, were glued together with cholesterol inside the cell, shipped out to the membrane, and they remained in these sort of structures that would keep them together and help them do things like signaling and stuff. So they found a way to test this by attaching a bead to a receptor, and they could drag the bead around with optical tweezers, and they could measure very precisely the amount of resistance that it encountered. So it was like fishing, you know, if you throw out your line in the water and you reel it in and it's really hard to pull in, then it means there's something big attached to it, and if it's really easy, then there's nothing or whatever. So they told me this story, and I understood, they told it very nicely, and I understood it, except for one thing, and that was, I hadn't had science since the 8th grade, and I had suppressed most of that. And in the 8th grade, the last time I'd seen a membrane was a black line around a cell, and it looked like a wall. And I thought, how can you pull a molecule through a wall? And it took us a long time to figure out why I was having trouble understanding this story, and finally, a scientist finally told me what a membrane's like. He said, think of it like two soap bubbles that are very tightly packed inside of each other. It's more of a liquid, it's not a solid. Oh, but no one ever thought to tell me what a membrane was like, because everybody knows what a membrane's like. And so it's very often that these very fundamental concepts that you have, no one explains them because they just assume that everyone knows them. They used a metaphor, which is interesting for reasons we'll talk about later. But so a lot of things that need to be said are just not there. So I came up with this concept of ghosts. And a ghost is something that you really need, the meaning of what I've written or said depends on this thing. If you don't know that, you will not understand something that I'm trying to say the way I intend it. And it's not there. It's not in the talk, or it's not in the text. The thing itself is not there. You may know it, but you may not. And so that's what a ghost is. And like I said, in science, it's really easy to pinpoint what these things are oftentimes. The other lesson that I learned from the soap bubble story was that the scientist has something in his head, an image maybe, or he's watching, when he describes a process, it's like he's watching a little film. And what I have to do is I have to construct my own version of that film or adopt that image that he has. And a lot of times they didn't even realize they had an image of something in their heads. They would just talk about it. But it was motivated by this picture. So a ghost can be an image of something that you have, and you try to describe it, and you see it, you think very clearly, but the other person doesn't have that image. So there are also architectural ghosts. And architectural ghosts are cases where you have a structure, a pattern in your head, and the meaning of what you're trying to say is based on that pattern. And we'll talk a lot about that. I'll show you several examples. So here's an image, and I can guarantee you that what I see when I look at this image is not the same as what you see in some way. If you show this to a non-scientist, we made a printout of this and put it on our office door, and somebody came by and said, that's a nice looking sort of ribbony hat for Carnival. I would like to get one of those. And so you know what this is. Let's go through it. What is it?
Protein.
Huh?
It's a protein.
This is protein. What's this? DNA. And what has the structure of DNA wrapped around?
Nucleosome.
A nucleosome, right. And so we have these 4 different colored things, so you can assume those are 4 things. And this thing is probably symmetric from front to back, so it's probably 8 things. There's 8 histones in a nucleosome, and it has a structure, okay? So you can decode it because you know things, but they're not in the image. The structure of DNA is not, there's no little pointer that says this is DNA because it has a double helix structure. And I could probably invert this image and make it wrong by twisting the spirals in the wrong way, it doesn't matter. But there's a lot of assumptions you also make, like front-back symmetry. But there's a really huge ghost in this image. Remember, a ghost is something that's not there. And there's all this stuff, this white stuff. And what is the white stuff? Well, this thing can only exist in a very specific chemical environment. Okay? The chemistry is not there, so... Okay, so that's an example of a ghost in an image. But the biggest ghost, and this was universal, truly universal, are models. So everything in science takes its meaning from a model. And an example of this is, Zobansky said, nothing in biology makes sense in the light of evolution. Which I think we all agree, right, these days? Well, what happens if you go to a bunch of PhD students in molecular biology and ask them to explain one of the most fundamental components of evolution, which is natural selection? You get some kind of weird answers. If you don't adapt too much, then new things emerge. It's a competition between individuals, a kind of fight for rare goods, where the strongest one wins, and it doesn't mean the rest die. The weakest ones may be led by the strongest ones. The biological process of reproducing efficient traits of living, that means sex, right? Natural selection is the death of animals because of a useless adaptation or not adapted enough to the environment. In modern human life, natural selection is almost extinct. That's exciting. And here's an absolutely Lamarckian view where I was very shocked. I was really shocked, okay? And actually...
Appalled.
Huh?
I'm not shocked, I'm appalled.
Yeah, well, try this experiment with your group sometime and you'll get some exciting results. That's kind of worrying. But what was really interesting is I went back and I decided, okay, if this is really true, then let me just take some kind of fundamental thing in molecular biology, like the name of a gene, and make a map that shows how it's integrated into evolution. Try that sometime. It's an extremely complex map that you have to draw. Because we have genes, so should I do this or not? Close your eyes and think of the letter A. Okay, open your eyes. What font did you see? How many say Times New Roman Arial? I love Calibri, this is done. So that letter is a concept that you've built by seeing lots of examples and integrating them into, and it needs to do 2 things. You need to be able to say what's an A and what's not an A, using examples you've never seen before, or new types of weird fonts, and so on and so on. Okay, so let's do another experiment, and let me ask you, somebody tell me the name of your favorite protein.
SRY.
Okay, oh, SRY, that's a good one. The Olympics and Russia and everything, right? Oh, that's cool. Can you tell me its sequence, please?
Sure, it's TG CCC. Look it up.
No, that's an F kappa B, sorry. Can you tell me, can you draw an atomic level resolution, it's the structure of the protein?
I could probably get close.
Oh, that's good.
Overachiever.
What is, but that would be only for one variant in some kind of consensus concept, right? So what's really interesting about this is it shows that we don't do science with proteins. We do science with this mental cognitive laboratory we have. And so my goal now was to understand what's in there, how's it organized, and how does it work. And I had some clues. I could see that these guys had a very strangely organized mental laboratory when it came to, right? But in order to find that out, I never would have found that out if I hadn't asked them to write something down. That's interesting. The people can go for years and years and years and have very strange ideas, and you will never find that out they will behave normally, you know, but you can find this out. So this concept that models are really crucial to understanding things in science led me to some realizations, and that is most scientific projects are based on a very specific question. It's also very interesting to go around to a group of students and ask them to tell you the question they're working on. And I find that when I do this, when I teach writing courses, that's our first exercise. And 90% of the time we have to change the question because it's not exactly really what they're working on. And that question is related to models in one of these, where they're trying to model a system or generate hypotheses from a model to test or improve it, or they found some kind of new RNA or whatever and they're trying to see how it fits in there, or they've looked at one system, they've got a very good model of what happens in the mouse, they're trying to apply it to humans, or so on and so on. Without this context, and very few papers actually put things this explicitly into this context, you can go for quite a while without really understanding what's going on and without really understanding the point of a question, because the question only makes sense if you know what the models are, and there's different ones. There's evolutionary models, there's biochemical, physical, and so on and so on.